Hello. Like many people who live off-grid, or those who want to create an off-grid power system, I used to always be thinking about how I could replicate mains electricity without ever really considering all the things I could possibly do without, or how to simply use less. Over the last 16 years, I've experimented with quite a few different off-grid setups, mostly solar. I've made quite a few mistakes along the way too. All the systems have worked, but not always that efficiently. For example, I've done things like situating the battery too far from the power source, or expecting too much from the solar panels in winter, and used the incorrect gauge wire or insufficient terminals and connections. I've even mounted a wind turbine where it's not that windy. But now I have... Oh, sorry girls. Sorry, you don't like me gesticulating, do you? Alright. What was I saying? But now I have found the very best system that will work for me and my power needs. So, let's get these boxes unpacked and get it set up. On a hill
Near a wood,
where nobody goes,
up a track,
through a gate,
The food forest grows with secrets and treasures for everyone's pleasure and Rob's discovery.
Look, what have we here? These 6 packages ought to contain the whole of my new solar system setup, if I've planned it correctly. And it should be able to all be assembled with no tools, except perhaps a screwdriver. Let's see. Oh, it's so exciting getting packages! Whilst I take delight in opening these, let me tell you about the existing solar setups here. There are 3 solar system setups here in the forest garden. The first one is for the kitchen caravan, and it came from the shop Maplin before they closed down a little while ago. There are 120 watts worth of panels that trickle charge a 12 volt 70 amp hour battery. Like most cars, the caravan runs on 12 volts, so no inverter is needed to step up the power. And this setup is enough to run the submersible water pump for the sink, the 12 volt LED lights inside, my DAB radio, and a 12 volt lighter socket for charging my telephone when I'm in there. But not much else really, and it's easy to run the battery flat if I'm not careful during the winter months. Which is the ironic thing about solar, is that you tend to use more electric when the sun's not shining, which is why good battery storage is so important. There's another solar setup for the shepherd's hut that I'm using as a bedroom at the moment. The solar setup itself is actually in and on the roof of the tool shed because the hut's a little bit shaded. Plus, I don't want to spoil the look of it by having a girt square black panel on the roof. It consists of a singular 120 watt 12 volt panel that trickle charges another 12 volt battery, a 110 amp hour one this time for that extra bit of storage, via a 20 amp charge control unit. This one has a nifty digital display, which is useful for checking out how well it's charging and how much power you're using without having to get out the multimeter. It's stepped up from 12 to 240 volts via an inverter of 150 watts. That inverter's a cheap one, but it has an advantage that many of the dearer ones don't. And that is, well, at night when you've got lots of lights on and various appliances plugged in, when the battery voltage drops, inverters tend to cut out. And that's for a couple of reasons. Inverters are designed mostly to be used with cars and motorhomes, and therefore they cut out to save that last bit of power in the battery to make sure you can start your vehicle again. The other reason is to make sure that the battery doesn't completely discharge, because that can damage them. Most of them don't really function very well below 50%. So with most of them, you have to manually switch them off and on again after it is you've unplugged whatever's causing the voltage to excessively drop. But with this inverter, however, it comes back on automatically, which on a winter's night when I'm cozied up by the fire in the hut, it's a wonderful thing. Often I turn on one too many lights and they all go out. So instead of traipsing across the dark, soggy field in my dressing gown to go and reset the thing, all I have to do is switch off the offending light or appliance and bingo! They all come back on again. Wonderful. This system does cut out rather frequently though, and that's because, as a rule of thumb, there's a voltage drop of about 1 volt per meter when sending electric down cables, which is why it's really important to situate your battery or batteries as close as possible to where the power is being generated and also where you're going to be using it. Which makes me think, I need to think where to put the battery in here actually. As close to the panels as possible. Maybe on a shelf. That's why I transform the voltage from 12 volts to 240 as close to the battery as possible, because if I were to try and send 12 volts down the 30 meter or so cable all the way to the hut, there would be no voltage left to step up when it got there. So I send it at 240 volts across the field down that long cable, although it still is a bit too long, and by the time it gets to the hut it's only about 210 volts rather than 240, which is why the lights flicker and are dimmer than they should be, and why my laptop always complains and doesn't always charge very fast or properly. But this setup I'm putting together for the yurt will actually power the hut too. They're quite close together, and that means I can dedicate the system in the shed to solely running a freezer in the shed. It ought to be more than capable of doing that, if that's all it has to cope with. Plus the heat generated by the freezer will stop my water pump from freezing in the winter. I hope. We'll see. The third solar setup here is an isolated system that's dedicated to powering the water pump. I don't connect anything else to it because it's imperative that I never run out of juice to power that pump. Not being able to pump water would be detrimental to life here, not just for me, for drinking and cooking and washing, etc., but for the plant's life, the greenhouse, and for the ducks and geese. It consists of two 12-volt monocrystalline 100-watt solar panels, as opposed to the cheaper and less efficient polycrystalline ones, connected via a 20-amp charge controller to another 12-volt 110 amp-hour battery, a deep cycle marine-grade leisure one. That is directly connected to a 12-volt 60-watt 5 litres per minute micro-diaphragm water pump, as well as some 12-volt LED lights for lighting. That system has proved to be so robust that I'm setting up the same one here in the yurt today. The only difference is that instead of connecting a 12-volt water pump, I'm connecting an inverter instead. That'll step the voltage up from the battery from 12 volts to 240 volts, mains power, though it's capped at 1000 watts, which is the absolute maximum wattage I'm ever going to need, based on the combined wattage of all the appliances I'm going to have plugged in at once. Here we are, all unpacked. We have the solar panels, one 12 volt 100 watt panel, another 12 volt 100 watt panel. Then we have the instructions. I'm planning to connect them in parallel rather than daisy chaining them in series, because I want to keep the voltage at 12 volts rather than 24 volts as it would be if I connected them in series. We have the cables to ensure we can connect them in parallel, and then the cables that will run from the panels to the charge controller, which again has a nifty LCD display. This is what I'll use to bring the cables through the side of the Yurt so they won't drip. It's like a waterproof junction box. And then these heavy duty cables that will go from the charge controller to this enormous battery just here. And I have some clip-on battery terminals for easy disconnection if necessary. Then to the charge controller will be connected this chunky pure sine wave inverter via these cables over here. And I didn't realize it when I ordered it, but it actually comes with a remote LCD display, so you can turn it on and off without having to be too close to it via this telephone-like looking cable. And there are the brackets. These are useful for going on the corners of the panels. They will raise them a couple of inches from the roof so that there's airflow behind them, because solar panels like to run a little bit cooler. So these will ensure that that can happen. As far as the packaging is concerned, the cardboard is all right because I can just take the plastic off of that and use it for mulch on the vegetable beds. But as far as this is concerned, the non-recyclable stuff, I somehow need to get it into plastic bottles because I'm zero waste here. I stuff anything that's not recyclable into 2-litre plastic bottles and it stays here on site that I will use to build something with in the future. It's been exactly 2 years now since I put any bags out for landfill, and I'm quite proud of myself. But somehow I've got to get that into plastic bottles, so before I do any installation I've got to do that first. Right, time to connect this all up. Cue montage music. Right, that's all done. It only took about an hour and a half in total, but it's now the next day because I ran out of daylight yesterday. Let's see if it works. All right, switch on the inverter. Ooh, green light, that's a good side. Oh, and the fans. That's all looking good. Battery voltage looks high. It must have been charging this morning. Well, according to this charge controller, the battery is being charged via the solar panel, and according to this inverter remote monitor, there are 0 watts being used because I've not plugged anything in yet. If I press and hold that, it should turn it on and off remotely. Or not. Better read the instructions. It's the autumn now, but the ultimate test of this system will be coming into the winter months. Over the past 9 years of living off-grid, as I explained at the beginning, I've had various systems, and they've been wonderful in the summertime, but from about October until April, I've had to make power choices. I have to, for example, choose between charging my telephone or listening to the radio for an hour. Or sometimes I'd save up something really special, like if I wanted to use my smoothie maker, I'd have the lights off for 3 hours and then I could justify using it for a few minutes. But hopefully, this system will be so robust that I shan't have to make choices anymore, which will be a shame in a way because it really made me think about using electricity when I had to make choices. But this will make life a little easier. I've angled the panels at about 30 degrees simply because that is the angle of the yurt roof, and they're south facing, and ideally I'd have some tracking system so that they move with the sun, but failing that at the moment they're just facing south at roughly 30-35 degrees, which is the optimum position for them really. And I haven't used those white brackets they came with to mount them. I've simply put them on the earth roof and mounted the earth up round the edge so that the wind can't get under them to lift them off. But again, the next storm will tell, so I'll let you know how that goes. And with regards to cost, I haven't mentioned how much this setup cost. I was looking on the internet on the various sites, and if I'd bought it in kit form, like all the components coming together in one package, it would have cost around £1,000. But buying the individual components rather than as a kit, it's cost just less than half of that. It was 400 and something pounds. That's including the battery, the charge controller, the inverter, the panels, the lot. And as a rule, when it comes to off-grid solar systems, not including the battery and the inverter and everything else, just the panels and the charge controller, you should expect to pay about £1 per watt. So the solar panels and the charge controller on their own would have cost about £200 because it's a 200 watt system. With regards to maintenance, apart from giving them a wipe over once in a while, which is quite important, the efficiency drops quite a lot when they're dirty. And in fact, they're covered with soil at the moment where I was frantically packing them in yesterday. That's one of the reasons why I've stuck with solar panels rather than having wind turbines or hydro, etc., as I have before. That's because this will last a good 20 years without having to do anything to it, apart from changing the battery. These batteries, in my experience, don't really last longer than 5 years. You can get 6 or 7 years out of them if you don't discharge them more than 50%. But if you're just quite light on their use, they can last a good while. So apart from changing the battery, this will hopefully last a very long time. Once again, thank you very much for watching. I will see you again soon with a fresh video, and in the winter time I shall make an update for how this system is going with everything plugged in and all the lights on, and that'll be a true test of how it's working. Bye! Hello again. It's now dusk on a late autumn evening. There hasn't been any proper sun for over a week now, and yet the lights are all blazing. Well, I haven't fitted the spotlights yet, but the ones that I've got are doing very, very well. My computer is charging over there. My telephone's charging. Well, it was until a few seconds ago when I picked it up to record this. And best of all, oh dear, what a treat. And the battery and the system shows no signs of diminishing or slowing yet. It's going to be a comfortable winter. Once again, thank you very much for watching. See you soon. Bye.